When I calmly placed the original property deed on the dining room table during our family meeting, my mother-in-law's face went ashen and my husband dropped his coffee mug, watching 5 years of calculated manipulation crumble in an instant. "You want to discuss property ownership," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "Let's discuss the real ownership. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." The morning everything changed started like any other Tuesday in our suburban neighborhood of Maplewood Heights, where perfectly manicured lawns masked the kind of family drama that would have made excellent television if it weren't destroying my marriage from the inside out. I stood in the kitchen of what I had believed was our home, preparing breakfast for my husband Marcus and trying to ignore the growing tension that had been building since his mother moved back to town 6 months earlier. Victoria Hendricks had returned to Connecticut after spending 3 years in Florida, ostensibly to be closer to her son and to help us as we navigated the early years of our marriage. At 47, I should have been experienced enough to recognize manipulation when it wore the mask of maternal concern, but Victoria possessed the kind of sophisticated emotional intelligence that came from decades of practice in getting exactly what she wanted from every situation. Marcus had always struggled with boundaries where his mother was concerned, a dynamic that had seemed merely frustrating during our courtship, but had evolved into something far more dangerous once we were legally bound together. Victoria had raised him as a single mother after his father died when Marcus was 12, creating an emotional dependency that she wielded with surgical precision whenever circumstances required her son's complete loyalty. The house had been purchased 18 months into our marriage, representing what I believed was our first major achievement as a couple. The colonial-style property on Elm Street featured 4 bedrooms, 2.5 bathrooms, and enough space for the family we hoped to build together. More importantly, it represented stability and commitment in ways that our apartment never could, a tangible symbol of our shared future and mutual investment in building something lasting. We had saved for the down payment together, combining my earnings as a marketing coordinator at a regional pharmaceutical company with Marcus's salary as a project manager for a construction firm. The financial sacrifice had required 2 years of careful budgeting, delayed vacations, and the kind of joint commitment that I assumed would naturally extend to joint ownership of the property we were purchasing together. The decision to put the house solely in Marcus's name had been presented as a temporary financial strategy based on his superior credit score and employment history. Victoria had suggested the arrangement during one of her increasingly frequent visits, explaining that single ownership would simplify the mortgage approval process and potentially secure better interest rates. Her reasoning sounded plausible, supported by official-looking documents and financial calculators that demonstrated modest but meaningful saving. "You can always add Rebecca to the deed later," Victoria had assured us, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had successfully navigated multiple real estate transactions. "Right now, the priority is securing the best possible term. Everything else can be adjusted once you're established homeowners." Marcus had embraced his mother's advice with the enthusiasm of someone who rarely questioned her expertise in financial matters. Victoria had managed his college planning, helped him secure his first job, and guided him through the purchase of his first car with results that had consistently exceeded his expectations. Her track record of successful guidance made her current real estate advice seem like natural wisdom rather than calculated manipulation. I had expressed concerns about the ownership arrangement during our private discussions, but Marcus dismissed my reservations as unnecessary worry about technicalities that could be easily resolved. His confidence in his mother's intentions was absolute, reinforced by years of experiences where her guidance had proven beneficial. My reluctance to trust her completely was interpreted as jealousy or insecurity rather than legitimate caution about protecting my own interests. The closing process proceeded exactly as Victoria had predicted, with Marcus receiving mortgage approval within 3 weeks and securing an interest rate that was indeed competitive compared to the alternatives we had researched. The efficiency of the transaction seemed to validate her approach, creating momentum that made questioning the ownership arrangement appear petty and ungrateful. The first indication that something was fundamentally wrong came 3 months after we moved into the house, when Victoria began referring to the property as Marcus's house rather than your house during family conversation. The linguistic shift was subtle but consistent, appearing in casual comments about maintenance responsibilities, neighborhood relationships, and long-term planning discussion. Marcus's house needs new gutters before winter, she would observe during her weekly visits, her phrasing creating a psychological ownership dynamic that excluded me entirely. When I corrected her by pointing out that the house belonged to both of us, she would smile indulgently and agree verbally while continuing to use possessive language that reinforced Marcus as the sole proprietor. These conversations began influencing Marcus's own language patterns in ways that initially seemed unconscious but gradually became more deliberate. He started referring to household decisions as his responsibility, discussing property improvements as his investment, and planning maintenance schedules without consulting me about preferences or priority. "I'm thinking about refinishing the basement," he announced one evening, his tone suggesting that he was sharing information rather than seeking input. When I asked about our shared vision for that space, he looked genuinely confused, as if my involvement in decisions about our home was an unexpected complication rather than a natural right. Victoria's influence extended beyond language into practical matters that affected our daily lives and financial planning. She had strong opinions about everything from landscaping choices to interior decorating, opinions that Marcus solicited and implemented without discussing them with me. Her preferences became household policy through his deference to her expertise and experience. The kitchen renovation provided the clearest example of this dynamic in action. I had been researching cabinet options and appliance upgrades for months, creating detailed plans that balanced our budget constraints with our long-term needs. Victoria visited during one of my research sessions and immediately dismissed my selections as impractical and overpriced. "Marcus, you need to be more careful about these decisions," she told him, speaking as if I were not present in the room. "This is your investment, and you cannot afford to let emotions drive expensive choices that you will regret later." Her alternative suggestions prioritized cost savings over aesthetic preferences, functionality over the design elements that would make the space enjoyable for daily use. Marcus accepted her recommendations immediately, canceling the consultations I had scheduled and moving forward with contractors who met Victoria's approval rather than mine. When I protested that my preferences deserved consideration since I would be using the kitchen more frequently than anyone else, Victoria smiled with the patience of someone explaining obvious facts to a confused child. "Of course your comfort matters, dear, but Marcus has to live with the financial consequences of these decisions long after emotions fade. He needs to think practically about resale value and return on investment." Her response contained assumptions about our marriage that were both subtle and devastating. The implication that Marcus would be dealing with financial consequences long after emotions fade suggested that our relationship was temporary while his ownership of the house was permanent. Her framing positioned my preferences as emotional indulgences that threatened his financial security rather than legitimate considerations in our shared home. Over the following months, I began documenting the gradual erosion of my position within what I had believed was our partnership. Victoria's influence operated through seemingly innocent suggestions that consistently favored Marcus's interests while minimizing my role in major decisions. Her advice always carried financial justifications that made opposition appear irresponsible or selfish. Property tax discussions provided another revealing example of her strategic approach. When our first tax bill arrived, Victoria suggested that Marcus should claim the full homestead exemption as the property owner, potentially saving several $100s annually. The tax savings were legitimate, but the psychological impact was significant, reinforcing the narrative that Marcus was the homeowner while I was merely a resident. "Rebecca can contribute to the household expenses," Victoria explained when Marcus asked about fairness, "but the tax benefits should go to the person who carries the legal responsibility for the property. That's just practical financial plan." Her reasoning sounded logical until I researched the relevant tax laws and discovered that married couples could file jointly and share the benefits regardless of whose name appeared on the deed. Victoria's advice was not incorrect, but it represented only one option among several that were available to us. Her consistent pattern of recommending approaches that favored Marcus's individual interests over our joint interests was becoming impossible to ignore. Insurance decisions followed the same pattern. Victoria recommended that Marcus purchase additional liability coverage that would protect him specifically as the property owner, suggesting that standard homeowners insurance might not adequately cover his exposure to lawsuits or claims. The additional coverage was expensive but seemed prudent, given the potential financial risks associated with property ownership. When I questioned whether the extra insurance was necessary, Victoria produced articles about homeowners who had faced devastating lawsuits after accidents on their property. Her research was thorough and genuinely frightening, creating urgency around decisions that affected our monthly budget significantly. Marcus implemented her recommendations immediately, prioritizing his protection over discussions about our shared financial plan. The cumulative effect of these individual decisions was a gradual transfer of practical control over our home from joint management to Marcus's unilateral authority. Each choice seemed reasonable in isolation, but together they created a power structure that excluded me from meaningful participation in decisions about the place where I lived and contributed financially. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Victoria's influence extended beyond property management into our broader financial planning, always with suggestions that strengthened Marcus's individual position while weakening our joint financial foundation. She recommended that he establish separate savings accounts for home maintenance and improvements, arguing that mixing household expenses with personal finances created unnecessary complexity. You need dedicated funds for property management, she explained during one of their private financial planning sessions, conversations that occurred with increasing frequency but somehow never included me despite my substantial contributions to our household income. This house is your responsibility and you need systems that reflect that reality. The separate account structure seemed logical from an organizational perspective, but it created practical consequences that isolated my financial contributions from decisions about how they were spent. Marcus controlled the household maintenance budget, determined improvement priorities, and selected contractors without needing to consult me about expenses that affected our shared living environment. When our water heater failed and required immediate replacement, Marcus made all the decisions about replacement options, installation timing, and financing arrangement. I learned about the new equipment when the installation crew arrived, discovering that he had chosen the most expensive option available and financed it through a home equity line of credit that I knew nothing about. I had to move quickly, he explained when I questioned why I had not been consulted about a major household expense. Victoria helped me research the options and find financing that made sense. Everything is handled. His response revealed how completely Victoria had positioned herself as his primary advisor for all major decisions, while relegating me to the role of someone who needed to be informed about conclusions rather than included in the decision-making process. Her expertise was apparently sufficient to replace any need for spousal consultation or joint planning. The home equity line of credit represented a particularly concerning development, because it created additional financial obligations secured by the property I had helped purchase but did not legally own. Marcus and Victoria had completed the application process together, providing financial information and signing documents that increased our debt burden without requiring my knowledge or consent. The credit line gives us flexibility for future improvements, Victoria explained when I expressed concerns about taking on additional debt. Property values in this neighborhood are increasing rapidly, so borrowing against equity is essentially free money that Marcus can use to increase his investment value. Her analysis contained enough legitimate financial logic to make my objections appear uninformed, but it also assumed that property appreciation would continue indefinitely and that we would never need to access that equity for other purposes. More troubling was her consistent use of language that positioned Marcus as the sole beneficiary of property value increases, as if my financial contributions and domestic labor added no value to our shared investment. The turning point came 6 months later when I received a call from our homeowner's insurance company regarding a claim adjustment that required additional documentation. The representative asked me to verify my status as a property owner, a routine request that should have been simple to fulfill. However, when I explained that I was married to the homeowner, the representative politely informed me that their records showed no spousal information on file. According to our documentation, Mr. Hendricks listed himself as single when he established this policy, the representative explained, her tone suggesting that this might be an oversight rather than an intentional misrepresentation. We'll need updated information if his marital status has changed since the policy was written. The conversation lasted only a few minutes, but it created questions that demanded immediate investigation. Marcus had purchased the insurance policy 8 months after our wedding, making it impossible for his marital status to be genuinely unclear. Someone had deliberately provided incorrect information to the insurance company, creating legal and financial implications that could affect our coverage in the event of a claim. When I confronted Marcus about the insurance documentation, he appeared genuinely surprised by the discrepancy. His confusion seemed authentic, suggesting that he might not have been aware of how his information was being reported to the insurance company. However, his immediate response was to call Victoria for clarification rather than contacting the insurance company directly to correct the problem. Mother handled most of the insurance paperwork, he explained, his tone suggesting that this delegation of responsibility was normal and appropriate. I'm sure there's a simple explanation for the confusion. She knows more about these policies than I do. His willingness to defer to Victoria's expertise even when her advice had apparently created legal complications revealed how completely he had abdicated responsibility for understanding the financial and legal implications of decisions made in his name. Her guidance had become a substitute for his own judgment, rather than supplementary advice that helped inform his choices. Victoria's explanation for the insurance discrepancy was characteristically smooth and immediately plausible. She claimed that single applicants sometimes received better rates for homeowners insurance, making the designation a temporary financial strategy that could be updated once the policy was established. Her reasoning sounded similar to the justifications she had provided for putting the house solely in Marcus's name, creating a pattern of temporary strategies that somehow never seemed to require correction. We can update the marital status information anytime, she assured us, her confidence suggesting that this was a minor administrative detail rather than a significant misrepresentation. The important thing is that Marcus has excellent coverage at competitive rates. Everything else is just paperwork. However, when I contacted the insurance company independently to inquire about updating the policy information, I discovered that changing marital status could affect coverage terms and potentially require a complete policy review. The representative also mentioned that providing incorrect information during the application process could be considered insurance fraud under certain circumstances, depending on whether the misrepresentation was intentional and material to the coverage decision. This conversation prompted me to begin investigating other aspects of our property ownership and financial arrangements that I had previously accepted based on Victoria's expertise and Marcus's trust in her guidance. The insurance discrepancies might represent a simple mistake, but it could also indicate a pattern of misrepresentation that had more serious implications for our legal and financial security. What I discovered during the following weeks of research fundamentally changed my understanding of our property ownership situation and revealed the true scope of Victoria's manipulation. Public records searches showed that our house had indeed been purchased solely in Marcus's name, but they also revealed additional information that no one had shared with me during the buying process. The property had originally been owned by Victoria herself, purchased 18 months before Marcus and I began house hunting. She had bought the house as an investment property, renovated it extensively, and then sold it to Marcus at a price that was approximately 15% above current market value. The transaction had been structured as a family sale that avoided realtor commissions, but also avoided independent property appraisals that might have revealed the inflated pricing. This information recontextualized every conversation about our home purchase and ownership arrangement. Marcus had not simply bought a house with better financing terms. He had purchased property from his mother at above-market prices using down payment money that I had contributed equally. Victoria had profited from our joint savings, while ensuring that I received no legal interest in the property we had supposedly bought together. The financial records told an even more disturbing story. Victoria had provided Marcus with a private loan to cover part of the down payment, creating additional debt obligations that I knew nothing about but that were secured by the property we lived in. The loan terms were documented in a private agreement between Marcus and Victoria that gave her specific rights to the property in the event of default or non-payment. More troubling was discovering that Victoria had been listed as a secondary contact on Marcus's mortgage account, giving her access to payment information and the authority to discuss account details with the lender. This arrangement meant that she was receiving regular updates about our mortgage payments, property taxes, and any changes to our financial situation that might affect the loan. The home equity line of credit that Marcus had established to finance household improvements was actually secured by a second mortgage that Victoria had co-signed. Her signature on the loan documents gave her legal rights to the property that exceeded my own despite my contributions to the household expenses and mortgage payment. In the event of financial difficulties, Victoria would have legal standing to protect her interests while I would have no formal recourse. These discoveries revealed that what I had believed was our joint investment in building a shared future was actually an elaborate transfer of my financial resources to Marcus and Victoria while ensuring that I retained no legal interest in the outcome. Every dollar I had contributed to down payment savings, mortgage payments, and household improvements had increased their wealth while leaving me completely vulnerable to their financial decisions. The investigation process became my evening occupation, conducted in secrecy while Marcus attended his weekly basketball games, and Victoria assumed I was occupied with household tasks or television programs. I methodically documented every aspect of our property ownership, financial arrangements, and insurance policies, creating a comprehensive picture of how my interests had been systematically undermined through seemingly legitimate transactions. Property tax records revealed that Marcus had indeed claimed the full homestead exemption that Victoria had recommended, but they also showed that the tax assessments had been appealing annually to reduce the property value for tax purposes. These appeals had been successful, saving Marcus money on annual tax bills, while potentially creating problems for insurance coverage that was based on higher property valuations. The insurance policy investigation revealed multiple discrepancies beyond the marital status misrepresentation. The coverage limits had been set based on property values that were lower than the purchase price Marcus had paid, potentially leaving us underinsured in the event of major damage or total loss. More concerning was discovering that Victoria was listed as an additional insured party on the policy, giving her rights to claim proceeds that I did not possess despite living in the house and contributing to the premium payment. Bank records painted the most complete picture of the financial manipulation that had been orchestrated around our property ownership. Marcus's separate accounts for household maintenance contained funds that came primarily from my contributions to joint expenses, but all withdrawal decisions were made unilaterally. The pattern of deposits and expenditures showed that I was funding improvements and maintenance that increased property value while having no legal claim to those investments. The private loan documentation between Marcus and Victoria contained clauses that were particularly concerning. The agreement specified that Victoria could demand immediate repayment of the full loan amount if she determined that the property was not being properly maintained or if Marcus's financial situation changed in ways that threatened her security. These provisions gave her enormous leverage over our housing situation and financial planning. Most disturbing was discovering that the loan agreement contained a clause requiring Marcus to maintain single ownership of the property until the private loan was completely repaid. This provision explained why the promise to add my name to the deed had never been fulfilled and suggested that Victoria had deliberately structured the financing to prevent joint ownership permanently rather than temporarily. Armed with comprehensive documentation of the legal and financial realities of our property ownership, I began developing a strategy for confronting this manipulation while protecting my own interests. The evidence revealed systematic deception that had transferred my financial resources to Marcus and Victoria while leaving me completely vulnerable to their decisions, but it also revealed potential legal remedies that could restore my rightful position. My research had identified that married couples in Connecticut have specific legal rights regarding property acquired during marriage, even when only one spouse holds title. These rights include claims to appreciation value, reimbursement for contributions to mortgage payments and improvements, and protection against transfers that would leave one spouse financially disadvantaged. However, asserting these rights would require legal action that could destroy our marriage while providing uncertain financial recovery. More importantly,
My investigation had revealed information that Marcus and Victoria apparently did not realize I possessed. The public records documentation of Victoria's original property purchase and subsequent sale to Marcus created evidence of potential fraud that could have serious legal consequences for both of them. The inflated sale price, combined with the private financing arrangements and insurance misrepresentations, suggested a pattern of financial manipulation that might constitute mortgage fraud or insurance fraud. The strategic question was whether to pursue legal remedies through divorce proceedings and civil litigation, or to use my evidence as leverage for negotiating a fair resolution that protected my interests without destroying all our relationship. The legal approach would be expensive, time-consuming, and emotionally devastating, but it would also expose Victoria's manipulation to judicial scrutiny, and potentially result in financial penalties that would discourage future similar behavior. The negotiation approach would require revealing my knowledge of their deception, while offering opportunities for them to correct the situation, voluntarily. This strategy carried risks that they might attempt to conceal evidence or transfer assets before I could protect my interests legally, but it also offered possibilities for resolution that would preserve some hope for our marriage while ensuring that my contributions were properly recognized and protected. I decided to prepare for both approaches simultaneously, gathering additional documentation that would support legal action, while developing proposals for fair resolution that addressed my legitimate interests without creating unnecessary punishment for past mistakes. The key would be demonstrating that I possessed comprehensive knowledge of their manipulation, while offering reasonable paths toward correcting the situation. The weeks leading up to my confrontation with Marcus and Victoria required careful preparation that balanced documentation gathering with maintaining normal household routines to avoid arousing suspicion about my investigation. I consulted with a family law attorney to understand my legal rights and options, obtained copies of all relevant public records, and created comprehensive financial analyses that demonstrated how my contributions had been misappropriated. The attorney consultation confirmed that my situation provided grounds for multiple legal remedies, including claims for restitution of my financial contributions, rights to property appreciation that occurred during our marriage, and potential fraud claims based on the misrepresentations that had induced my participation in financial arrangements that benefited others exclusively. However, the attorney also warned that proving intentional fraud would require evidence of Marcus's knowledge and participation in Victoria's deception, which might be difficult to establish if he had been manipulated rather than complicit. More encouraging was learning that Connecticut law provided strong protections for spouses who had contributed to property purchases and improvements, even when their names did not appear on title documents. These protections could require Marcus to compensate me for my contributions, regardless of how the property ownership had been structured, providing financial security even if our marriage could not be salvaged. The public records research revealed additional information that strengthened my position significantly. Victoria's property purchase had been financed through a commercial loan that required disclosure of her intentions for the property. The loan documents indicated that she had represented the purchase as a primary residence, rather than an investment property, potentially violating the terms of her financing agreement. This misrepresentation could create legal vulnerabilities that would discourage her from pursuing aggressive tactics in response to my demands for fair treatment.
I also discovered that the inflated sale price Victoria had charged Marcus exceeded the amount that would be considered reasonable for interfamily transactions under federal tax law. The Internal Revenue Service had specific regulations governing sales between related parties that were designed to prevent tax avoidance through artificial pricing arrangements. Victoria's transaction with Marcus might constitute a violation of these regulations that could result in tax penalties and additional scrutiny of their financial arrangements. The insurance investigation revealed that Victoria's status as an additional insured party on our homeowner's policy created potential liability for insurance fraud if claims were filed that misrepresented the property ownership or usage. Her rights to claim proceeds from a policy that covered a property where she did not live could be viewed as an attempt to obtain insurance benefits fraudulently, particularly given the misrepresentation of Marcus's marital status during the application process. 3 months after beginning my investigation, I felt prepared to confront the systematic deception that had shaped our property ownership and financial arrangements. The evidence I had gathered painted a clear picture of manipulation that had transferred my financial resources to Marcus and Victoria, while leaving me legally and financially vulnerable to their future decisions. The setting for this confrontation would be crucial for achieving the psychological impact necessary to demonstrate the seriousness of my position and the strength of my evidence. I chose our dining room for the family meeting, the same space where we had celebrated our home purchase and planned our future together. The familiar environment would remind everyone present of the trust that had been violated and the promises that had been broken. I arranged the documents in carefully organized stacks that would allow me to present evidence systematically, while maintaining control over the pace and direction of our conversation. The public records documentation would demonstrate my knowledge of the true property ownership history. The financial analyses would show how my contributions had been misappropriated. The legal research would reveal the remedies available to protect my interests and the consequences they might face for their deception. The original property deed that I had obtained from the county records office would serve as the centerpiece of my presentation, the document that would prove Victoria's original ownership and her profit from selling the property to Marcus at inflated prices using my money. This single piece of paper contained information that would destroy their narrative about the property purchase and reveal the calculated nature of their manipulation. When I placed that deed on the dining room table and watched their faces transform from confidence to horror, I knew that 5 years of careful manipulation had finally reached its inevitable conclusion. The truth was about to emerge, and with it, the reckoning that they had tried so desperately to avoid. The conversation that followed would determine whether our relationships could survive the revelation of this betrayal. But regardless of the personal outcomes, I was finally ready to reclaim my rightful position and protect my interests from further manipulation. The foundation of doubt they had built was about to crumble, and this time I would be the one controlling the narrative. The morning after discovering the insurance discrepancy, I woke with the kind of clarity that comes from finally recognizing a pattern that has been hidden in plain sight. Victoria's manipulation had operated through a sophisticated network of seemingly legitimate financial decisions, each one defensible in isolation, but collectively forming a system designed to transfer my resources while eliminating my legal protection. The insurance misrepresentation was not an oversight, but a calculated component of a broader strategy that required immediate and comprehensive investigation. I established a systematic approach to researching every aspect of our property ownership and financial arrangements, treating this investigation with the same methodical precision that had made me successful in my marketing career. Each document would be obtained directly from official sources, rather than relying on explanations provided by Marcus or Victoria. Every financial transaction would be traced through primary records, rather than accepting summaries or interpretations from interested parties. The first week of investigation focused on obtaining complete property records from the county clerk's office. These documents revealed the complete ownership history of our house, including information that neither Marcus nor Victoria had shared during our property purchase discussion. The records showed that Victoria had purchased the property 18 months before our marriage, not as a primary residence, but as an investment property that she had extensively renovated, using professional contractors and substantial financial resources. The renovation work that Victoria had completed before selling the property to Marcus included kitchen upgrades, bathroom modernization, new flooring throughout the house, and complete electrical system update. These improvements had cost approximately $45,000 according to the contractor invoices that were filed with the city building department as part of the permit application. The quality and scope of this work explained why the house had appeared move-in ready when Marcus and I began our property search. More significantly, the property records revealed that Victoria had purchased the house for $165,000 and had sold it to Marcus for $235,000, creating a profit of $70,000 from the transaction. This profit margin exceeded the actual cost of the renovations she had completed, meaning that she had charged Marcus substantially more than the fair market value for the improvements she had made using her own resources. The timing of these transactions created additional concerns about the legitimacy of the financial arrangements between Victoria and Marcus. She had purchased the property 3 months before Marcus and I began seriously discussing homeownership, suggesting that her investment might have been made with advanced knowledge of our plans and financial capability. The renovation timeline aligned perfectly with our savings accumulation schedule, creating circumstances that positioned her property as the ideal solution to our housing needs, precisely when we were ready to make a purchase. The second week of investigation focused on obtaining complete financial records for all accounts and loans associated with our property ownership. This research required visits to multiple banks, credit unions, and lending institutions, each of which provided documentation that revealed aspects of our financial situation that I had not previously understood. The complexity of the financing arrangements became apparent only when examined as an integrated system rather than individual transactions. Marcus's mortgage application had been supported by financial documentation that included my income information and credit history, despite the fact that my name would not appear on the ownership document. This inclusion of my financial information had strengthened his loan application significantly, enabling him to qualify for a larger mortgage amount and more favorable interest rates than his individual financial profile would have supported. The lender had approved the loan based on our combined financial capacity while providing legal ownership rights exclusively to Marcus. The private loan from Victoria to Marcus carried terms that were far more complex than the simple family assistance that had been described to me. The loan agreement specified that Victoria retained a security interest in the property until the full amount was repaid, giving her legal rights that exceeded those of a typical family lender. More concerning were provisions that allowed Victoria to demand immediate repayment of the entire loan balance if she determined that the property was not being properly maintained or if Marcus's financial situation changed in ways that might threaten her security. These provisions effectively gave Victoria veto power over any major decisions regarding our property, including potential refinancing, additional borrowing, or modifications to the ownership structure. The loan terms required Marcus to maintain comprehensive insurance coverage with Victoria listed as a loss payer, ensuring that she would receive proceeds from any insurance claims before other creditors or beneficiaries. The agreement also prohibited Marcus from transferring ownership interest in the property without Victoria's written consent, explaining why his promises to add my name to the deed had never been fulfilled. The home equity line of credit that Marcus had established carried Victoria's signature as a co-borrower, making her equally responsible for repayment while giving her access to the credit line for her own use. The monthly statements showed that Victoria had made several withdrawals from this account to fund expenses that were unrelated to our household needs or property improvement. These withdrawals included payments for her own apartment rent, automobile maintenance, and medical expenses that she had charged against the equity in our home. Bank records revealed that Victoria had been receiving monthly payments from Marcus that were described as rent contributions, but were actually repayment installments for the private loan she had provided. These payments had been automatically transferred from our joint checking account, meaning that my contributions to household expenses were being used to pay Victoria for the privilege of living in a house that she had sold to Marcus at inflated prices using money that I had helped provide. The third week involved consultations with legal professionals who specialized in property law and marital rights to understand the remedies available for addressing the financial manipulation that I had discovered. These consultations revealed that my situation was not unique, but represented a common pattern of asset concealment and financial abuse that occurred when one spouse systematically excluded the other from property ownership while benefiting from their financial contribution. Attorney Sarah Chen explained that Connecticut law provided several avenues for protecting the rights of spouses who had contributed to property purchases or improvements regardless of whose name appeared on title documents. These protections included claims for restitution of financial contributions, rights to property appreciation that occurred during marriage, and equitable distribution remedies that could require compensation for documented investments in jointly used property. The evidence I had gathered suggested grounds for pursuing claims of constructive fraud, which could be established without proving intentional deception if the circumstances showed that one party had gained unfair advantage through non-disclosure or misrepresentation of material facts. Victoria's concealment of her original property ownership and profit from the sale to Marcus constituted exactly the type of non-disclosure that could support fraud claims under Connecticut law. More encouraging was learning that the private loan arrangement between Victoria and Marcus contained provisions that might be legally unenforceable due to inadequate disclosure and potential conflicts of interest. Family loans between parents and adult children were subject to specific legal requirements regarding documentation, interest rates, and repayment terms. Victoria's loan appeared to violate several of these requirements, potentially making the security interest she claimed in our property legally invalid. The insurance misrepresentations created additional legal vulnerabilities for both Victoria and Mark. Providing false information during insurance applications constituted insurance fraud under Connecticut criminal law, regardless of whether claims had been filed based on the misrepresentation. The fact that Victoria was listed as an additional insured party while claiming benefits based on false marital status information could result in criminal charges and civil penalties that would far exceed any financial benefits they had obtained. Attorney Chen recommended that I document all my financial contributions to the property purchase and improvements, while obtaining independent appraisals that would establish the current fair market value of the house. This documentation would support restitution claims, while providing evidence of the extent to which my investments had increased the property value that Victoria and Marcus controlled exclusively. The fourth week focused on obtaining independent property appraisals and creating comprehensive documentation of my financial contributions to the house purchase and subsequent improvement. This analysis would provide the factual foundation for any legal claims, while demonstrating the magnitude of the financial disadvantage that Victoria's manipulation had created for my interest. 3 different certified appraisers evaluated our property and provided consistent estimates that the current fair market value was approximately $285,000. This valuation was significantly higher than the $235,000 that Marcus had paid Victoria, indicating that the property had appreciated substantially since our purchase. However, the appraisals also revealed that much of this appreciation resulted from general market trends, rather than specific improvements that we had made since moving into the house. The renovation work that Victoria had completed before selling the property to Marcus had indeed added substantial value, but my research revealed that she had charged him more than the actual cost of these improvements, while using materials and contractors that were less expensive than the premium prices she had included in her sale calculation. Independent contractor estimates suggested that the renovation work had cost approximately $32,000, rather than the $45,000 that Victoria had claimed when justifying her sale price to market. Documentation of my financial contributions revealed that I had provided exactly half of the down payment funds through savings that I had accumulated before our marriage, combined with additional savings that we had accumulated jointly during our engagement period. My individual contribution totaled $28,000, representing funds that had been transferred permanently to Marcus and Victoria without providing me any legal interest in the property that these funds had helped purchase. Beyond the down payment contributions, my share of monthly mortgage payments over the 22 months since our purchase totaled approximately $18,000. These payments had reduced the mortgage principal balance while increasing Marcus's individual equity position in the property. Additionally, my contributions to property taxes, insurance premiums, and maintenance expenses had totaled approximately $8,000, representing investments that had preserved and enhanced property value, while providing no legal benefits to my interest. The comprehensive financial analysis demonstrated that my total investment in the property exceeded $54,000, not including the opportunity costs associated with committing these resources to property ownership,
rather than alternative investments that would have provided direct benefits to my financial position. This investment had helped create equity of approximately $78,000 that Marcus controlled entirely, while I retained no legal claim to the value that my contributions had helped create. The fifth week involved developing a comprehensive strategy for confronting Marcus and Victoria with the evidence of their deception, while positioning myself to achieve fair resolution of the financial manipulation that had systematically disadvantaged my interests. This planning required balancing multiple objectives, including restitution of my financial contributions, legal protection of my ongoing interests, and preservation of relationships to the extent possible given the breach of trust that had occurred. The primary strategic challenge was determining whether to pursue immediate legal action or to attempt negotiated resolution through direct confrontation supported by the threat of legal consequence. Legal action would provide the strongest protection for my interests and the greatest potential for financial recovery, but it would also be expensive, time-consuming, and would definitely end my marriage while creating lasting animosity with Marcus's family. Negotiated resolution offered possibilities for fair compensation without the costs and uncertainty associated with litigation, but it would require Marcus and Victoria to acknowledge their wrongdoing and agree to terms that adequately protected my interests going forward. The success of this approach would depend on their recognition that my evidence was comprehensive enough to support successful legal action if they refused to negotiate in good faith. I decided to prepare for both approaches simultaneously by developing specific proposals for fair resolution, while also retaining legal counsel and obtaining all documentation necessary for filing formal legal claims. This dual preparation would allow me to present credible alternatives while maintaining the flexibility to pursue whichever approach proved most effective, based on their initial responses to my evidence. The negotiated resolution proposal would include three primary components addressing past, present, and future protection of my interests. For past financial contributions, I would demand immediate reimbursement of my documented investments, plus reasonable compensation for the opportunity costs associated with these funds. For present interests, I would require legal recognition of my ownership rights through addition of my name to the property deed and all related financial accounts. For future protection, I would insist on modification of the private loan agreement with Victoria to eliminate provisions that gave her control over our property decision. If Marcus and Victoria refused to negotiate fair resolution, or attempted to conceal assets in response to my demands, I would immediately file legal claims for fraud, restitution, and partition of marital property while seeking emergency court orders to prevent further financial manipulation. This approach would demonstrate that my investigation had been thorough and that I was prepared to pursue all available remedies to protect my legitimate interests. The final week before confronting Marcus and Victoria required psychological preparation for conversations that would fundamentally alter our family relationships, regardless of their specific outcome. The evidence I had gathered proved systematic deception that violated the basic trust necessary for maintaining healthy personal relationships. Even if financial restitution could be achieved, the underlying manipulation represented a betrayal that would permanently change how I viewed both Marcus and Victoria. The most difficult aspect of this preparation was accepting that my marriage might not survive the revelation of Marcus's participation in his mother's financial manipulation. Whether his involvement had been knowing and deliberate or unknowing and manipulated, the practical effect had been to systematically disadvantage my interests while enriching his position. Trust that had been broken through such fundamental deception might prove impossible to rebuild regardless of his intentions or explanations. However, I also recognized that confronting this manipulation was essential for my long-term financial security and personal integrity. Allowing the deception to continue would signal acceptance of treatment that violated my basic rights while creating precedent for additional manipulation in the future. The courage to demand fair treatment was necessary not only for recovering my current losses, but for establishing boundaries that would protect me from future exploitation. I spent considerable time examining my own contributions to the situation, that had enabled Victoria's manipulation to succeed for so long. My willingness to defer to her expertise, my acceptance of explanations that favored Marcus's interests over joint decision-making, and my failure to independently verify financial information had all created opportunities for the deception to continue undetected. Learning from these mistakes would be essential for protecting myself in future relationships and financial decisions. The investigation process had also revealed strengths that I had not previously recognized in myself. My ability to conduct thorough research, analyze complex financial arrangements, and develop strategic responses demonstrated capabilities that extended far beyond my professional marketing experience. These skills would serve me well in managing my financial affairs independently and in evaluating future opportunities for investment and partnership. Most importantly, the investigation had clarified my own values and priorities in ways that would guide my decisions, regardless of how the confrontation proceeded. Financial security was important, but it was secondary to maintaining personal integrity and self-respect. Relationships were valuable, but not when they required accepting treatment that violated basic principles of fairness and mutual respect. The courage to stand up for my legitimate interests was essential for living authentically rather than simply maintaining comfortable illusions. The culmination of my investigation involved obtaining the original property deed that would serve as the centerpiece of my confrontation with Marcus and Victoria. This document represented irrefutable proof of Victoria's original ownership and subsequent profit from selling the property to Marcus at inflated prices using funds that I had contributed. The deed would demonstrate that their narrative about our property purchase had been fundamentally dishonest from the beginning. The County Records Office provided a certified copy of the deed, showing Victoria Hendricks as the original purchaser of the property at 1207 Elm Street for the price of $165,000 on March 15, 2 years earlier. The document was signed by Victoria and notarized according to legal requirements, creating official evidence that could not be disputed or explained away through alternative interpretations of ambiguous circumstances. The subsequent deed, transferring ownership from Victoria to Marcus, was dated 8 months later and showed the sale price of $235,000 that represented Victoria's $70,000 profit from the transaction. This deed was also properly executed and recorded, creating a complete paper trail that documented the financial arrangement between mother and son that had been concealed from me during our property purchase discussion. Additional documentation from the mortgage company showed that Marcus's loan application had been approved based on combined financial information from both of us, while the loan proceeds had been paid entirely to Victoria as the seller. This meant that my income and credit history had been used to secure financing that enabled Victoria's profit, while I received no legal interest in the property that the loan had purchased. The insurance documentation provided the final piece of evidence necessary to demonstrate the systematic nature of the deception. Victoria's status as an additional insured party on our homeowner's policy gave her legal rights to claim proceeds from coverage that I was paying for but could not access myself. Combined with the misrepresentation of Marcus's marital status, these insurance arrangements created potential criminal liability that significantly strengthened my negotiating position. I organized all of this evidence into clearly labeled folders that would allow systematic presentation during our confrontation. The documentation was arranged to tell the complete story of their deception while providing immediate answers to any questions or objections they might raise. Each folder contained copies of original documents along with analysis showing how the information contradicted explanations that had been provided to me previously. The psychological impact of presenting this evidence would be crucial for achieving the behavioral changes necessary to protect my interests going forward. Marcus and Victoria needed to understand that I possessed comprehensive knowledge of their deception and that any attempts at continued manipulation would be met with immediate legal action. The strength of my evidence would determine whether they chose cooperation or confrontation in response to my demands for fair treatment. As I prepared for this confrontation, I reflected on how the investigation process had transformed my understanding of my own capabilities and work. The systematic research, legal analysis, and strategic planning that I had completed demonstrated skills that extended far beyond what I had believed myself capable of achieving. This experience had proven that I possessed the intelligence, determination, and courage necessary to protect my interests, even when facing sophisticated opposition from people who had underestimated my ability. The confrontation that lay ahead would test whether Marcus and Victoria were capable of acknowledging their wrongdoing and working toward fair resolution, or whether legal action would be necessary to achieve justice. Either way, I was prepared to pursue whatever course of action was required to reclaim my rightful position and establish the respect that I deserved in any relationship that I chose to maintain. The foundation of doubt that they had carefully constructed was about to crumble under the weight of truth that could no longer be hidden or explained away. The time for deception had ended, and the time for accountability had finally arrived. The transition from investigation to confrontation required establishing an unassailable foundation of evidence that would withstand any attempts at deflection or counter-manipulation. I understood that Victoria possessed considerable experience in financial manipulation and would likely respond to my accusations with sophisticated tactics designed to maintain her advantage while undermining my credibility. The strength of my documentary evidence would determine whether this confrontation resulted in fair resolution or escalated into protracted legal warfare. I began by creating comprehensive financial analyses that demonstrated the precise economic impact of the deception on my personal financial position. These calculations required detailed tracking of every dollar I had contributed to the property acquisition and maintenance, along with projections showing how alternative investments of these funds would have performed during the same time period. The analysis revealed that my opportunity costs exceeded $15,000 beyond the direct losses from the property manipulation. The documentation process extended beyond simple record-keeping to include independent verification of key facts through third-party sources. I obtained certified copies of all relevant documents from official repositories rather than relying on materials that Marcus or Victoria might have retained. Property records came directly from the county clerk's office. Financial records were obtained from banks and lending institutions through formal requests that created official paper trails. Insurance documentation was secured through direct communication with carriers rather than through agents who might have relationships with Victoria. This methodical approach ensured that my evidence could withstand aggressive scrutiny while demonstrating the thoroughness of my investigation to anyone who might question my conclusion. Each document was authenticated through proper channels and organized according to legal standards that would support formal litigation if negotiated resolution proved impossible. The presentation quality of this evidence would communicate my seriousness and preparation while establishing my credibility as someone who understood the legal implications of the situation. The legal consultation process expanded beyond initial rights assessment to include detailed strategic planning for multiple potential outcomes. Attorney Sarah Chen provided guidance on optimal approaches for presenting evidence while maintaining negotiating leverage throughout the confrontation process. Her experience with similar cases revealed common defensive tactics that Victoria and Marcus might employ, along with effective counter-strategies that would protect my interests regardless of their response. The attorney emphasized that successful resolution would require maintaining control over the pace and direction of discussions while avoiding emotional reactions that might undermine my strategic position. Victoria would likely attempt to shift focus away from factual evidence toward relationship dynamics and family loyalty concerns.
Marcus might genuinely not understand the full scope of his mother's manipulation, creating opportunities for alliance building if he could be separated from Victoria's influence during key decision-making moments. Establishing the current fair market value of our property required engaging multiple certified appraisers who could provide independent assessments that would be accepted by courts or lending institutions. These appraisals would demonstrate both the magnitude of Victoria's original profit and the extent to which my financial contributions had helped preserve and enhance property value that I could not legally access. The first appraiser, Margaret Foster, specialized in residential properties within our specific neighborhood and brought extensive knowledge of local market conditions that had influenced property values since our purchase. Her analysis revealed that properties in our area had appreciated at an average rate of 4% annually, making our house worth approximately $275,000 based on general market trends alone. However, Foster's detailed property inspection identified specific improvements and maintenance activities that had enhanced value beyond general market appreciation. The kitchen updates that Victoria had completed before selling to Marcus had been maintained in excellent condition through regular cleaning and minor repairs that I had coordinated and funded. The landscaping improvements that I had implemented using household maintenance funds had increased curb appeal and property aesthetics in ways that translated directly into measurable value increases. The second appraisal, conducted by Robert Kim from a firm that specialized in legal and financial evaluations, provided a more conservative assessment that focused on easily documented value components. Kim's analysis separated market appreciation from improvement-related value increases, allowing precise calculation of how much value had been created through my specific contributions versus general economic condition. Kim's methodology proved particularly valuable for understanding the financial impact of the private loan arrangement between Victoria and Marcus. His analysis demonstrated that the interest rates and repayment terms they had established were significantly more favorable to Victoria than comparable commercial financing would have provided. The below-market interest rate represented an additional transfer of value from our household to Victoria that exceeded the documented loan amount by approximately $8,000 over the repayment period. The third appraisal, performed by Diana Santos, who specialized in divorce and partition proceedings, provided estimates of how the property value would be divided if legal action became necessary. Santos explained that courts typically awarded proportional interests based on documented financial contributions, meaning that my $54,000 investment would entitle me to approximately 20% of current property value regardless of whose name appeared on the deed. This proportional calculation revealed that my legitimate claim exceeded $55,000 based on current property value, not including additional compensation for the opportunity costs associated with these funds or penalties for the fraudulent misrepresentation that had induced my participation. The mathematical precision of these calculations would be crucial for demonstrating that my demands for restitution were based on objective financial analysis rather than emotional reactions to personal betrayal. Understanding the psychological dynamics that had enabled Victoria's manipulation was essential for developing communication strategies that would maximize the probability of achieving fair resolution through negotiation rather than litigation. Victoria's success had depended on maintaining information asymmetries while exploiting Marcus's emotional dependency and my trust in their expertise. Effective confrontation would require disrupting these dynamics while providing face-saving alternatives that enabled cooperation. Victoria's personality profile suggested someone who responded to challenges against her authority with escalation and control-seeking behavior rather than acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Direct accusations of fraud or manipulation would likely trigger defensive responses that prioritized protecting her reputation over finding mutually acceptable solutions. More effective would be presenting evidence systematically while framing the discussion in terms of correcting misunderstandings rather than exposing deliberate deception. Marcus presented different psychological challenges due to his apparent genuine confusion about many aspects of the financial arrangements his mother had orchestrated. His emotional dependency on Victoria's approval made direct confrontation with her difficult, but it also created opportunities for building alliance around shared interests in resolving the situation fairly. If Marcus could be helped to understand that his own long-term financial security was threatened by the unstable legal foundation of our property ownership, he might become motivated to support corrective action. The communication strategy needed to address both individual psychology and group dynamics during what would inevitably be a highly emotional confrontation. I planned to begin by presenting factual evidence without editorial commentary, allowing Marcus and Victoria to absorb the implications before offering interpretations or demands. This approach would prevent immediate defensive reactions while establishing my credibility as someone who had conducted thorough and objective analysis. The presentation sequence would progress from least threatening to most damaging evidence, building momentum while providing multiple opportunities for acknowledgement and cooperation before revealing information that would make continued denial impossible. Insurance misrepresentations would be addressed before property ownership deception. Financial calculations would be presented before legal consequence. This graduated approach would allow them to choose cooperation at any point while demonstrating that continued resistance would only result in exposure of additional wrongdoing. I practiced delivering this presentation using role-playing scenarios that prepared me for various defensive tactics they might employ. Victoria might attempt to shift blame to Marcus by claiming that he had misunderstood her advice or implemented her suggestions incorrectly. Marcus might claim ignorance of financial details, while expressing willingness to correct any problems that had occurred inadvertently. Both might attempt to minimize the significance of the problems by arguing that everything could be resolved through simple administrative correction. Creating a comprehensive framework for fair financial resolution required balancing multiple objectives, including compensation for past losses, protection of current interests, and prevention of future manipulation. The settlement proposal needed to be substantial enough to provide meaningful restitution while remaining reasonable enough to encourage voluntary agreement rather than forcing expensive litigation that would benefit only attorneys. The baseline calculation included direct reimbursement of my documented financial contributions totaling $54,000. Adjusted for inflation and opportunity costs, that would bring the total to approximately $62,000. This amount represented the minimum necessary to restore my financial position to where it would have been without the property-related deception. However, additional components were necessary to address the broader financial manipulation and provide adequate protection going forward. Compensation for the insurance fraud required separate calculation because it created ongoing legal liability that extended beyond simple financial loss. The misrepresentation of Marcus's marital status had potentially voided coverage for claims that might arise while I was living in the house, creating exposure that could result in substantial personal liability if accidents or disasters occur. Fair compensation for this risk exposure would require either immediate correction of the insurance documentation or financial guarantees that would protect me from potential future losses. The private loan arrangement between Victoria and Marcus required complete restructuring to eliminate provisions that gave Victoria control over our property decisions and access to our home equity. Fair resolution would require either immediate payoff of this loan using funds that Victoria and Marcus would provide, or modification of terms that eliminated Victoria's security interest in the property while establishing market-rate interest charges that reflected the true cost of family finance. Property ownership corrections would require adding my name to the deed in proportion to my documented financial contributions, providing legal protection that could not be reversed through future manipulation. This correction would need to be accompanied by modification of mortgage documentation to reflect joint ownership, ensuring that both spouses had equal rights and responsibilities regarding the property that we had purchased together using joint financial resources. The settlement framework included enforcement mechanisms that would ensure compliance with agreement terms while providing remedies if Victoria or Marcus attempted to circumvent their obligation. These provisions would include financial penalties for non-compliance, automatic legal actions that would be triggered by specified violations, and monitoring procedures that would provide early warning of attempts to hide assets or manipulate financial records. Preparing for confrontation required comprehensive risk assessment that identified potential negative outcomes along with contingency plans that would protect my interests regardless of how Marcus and Victoria responded to my evidence and demand. The primary risks included asset concealment, relationship destruction, legal counterattacks, and financial retaliation that could worsen my position if not properly anticipated and addressed. Asset concealment represented the most immediate financial threat because Victoria and Marcus controlled property and financial accounts that could be transferred or encumbered before I could obtain legal protection. My investigation had revealed that Victoria had previous experience with complex financial transactions, suggesting that she possessed both knowledge and motivation to protect her interests through asset manipulation if she perceived serious threats to her position. Preventing asset concealment required careful timing timing of my confrontation with immediate follow-up actions that would establish legal protection before Victoria could implement defensive measures. Attorney Chen had prepared documentation for emergency court orders that could freeze assets and prevent transfers if Marcus and Victoria refused to negotiate in good faith. These legal tools would be activated immediately if initial confrontation revealed attempts to hide property or financial resources. Relationship destruction was inevitable, given the magnitude of betrayal that my evidence revealed, but the extent of family damage could be influenced by how I managed the confrontation process and aftermath. Maintaining some possibility of relationship repair required avoiding personal attacks while focusing on factual evidence and financial restitution. However, I also needed to accept that relationship preservation could not be prioritized over protecting my legitimate financial. Legal counterattacks might include attempts to challenge my evidence, question my motives, or file claims designed to distract from the core issues of financial manipulation. Victoria's sophisticated understanding of legal processes suggested that she might attempt to use the court system as a weapon for harassment rather than genuine dispute resolution. Preparing for such tactics required retaining qualified legal counsel while documenting all interactions to prevent false claims about my behavior or intention. Financial retaliation could take various forms, including attempts to force sale of our house, demands for immediate repayment of Victoria's private loan, or manipulation of household expenses and financial obligations. These tactics would be designed to create pressure for accepting unfavorable settlement terms rather than pursuing full restitution through legal action. Protecting against financial retaliation required establishing independent financial resources while preparing for potential disruption of current living arrangements. The contingency planning process included developing multiple scenarios for post-confrontation outcomes ranging from complete cooperation to total warfare. Each scenario included specific action plans, resource requirements, and decision criteria that would guide my responses based on their actual behavior rather than emotional reactions to stressful circumstances. This preparation would enable strategic decision-making during what would inevitably be a highly emotional and rapidly evolving situation. Recognizing that confronting sophisticated financial manipulation would require external support and validation, I began carefully building relationships with professionals and advisors who could provide expertise, credibility, and assistance throughout the resolution process. These relationships would be crucial for maintaining perspective during emotional confrontations while ensuring that I had access to resources necessary for protecting my interest effectively. The legal support network expanded beyond Attorney Chen to include referrals to specialists in insurance fraud, real estate law, and family financial disputes. These additional consultations provided specialized knowledge that would be essential if the confrontation escalated into complex litigation requiring expertise in multiple legal areas. Having established relationships with qualified experts would prevent delays and ensure competent representation if immediate legal action became necessary. Financial planning support came through consultation with certified financial planners who specialized in asset protection and divorce planning. These professionals provided guidance on optimizing my financial position for various potential outcomes while identifying strategies that would minimize tax consequences and maximize long-term financial security regardless of how property and asset disputes were ultimately resolved. Professional validation of my evidence and analysis came through independent review by forensic accountants who specialized in financial fraud investigation. Their confirmation that my findings were accurate and significant provided additional credibility that would be valuable if Marcus or Victoria attempted to challenge my conclusions or characterize my investigation as biased or incompetent. Professional validation would also be essential for court proceedings if litigation became necessary. Personal support networks required careful consideration because family financial disputes often created pressure on friends and relatives to choose sides or avoid involvement entirely. I identified specific individuals who could provide emotional support without becoming directly involved in the financial conflicts, ensuring that I would have access to perspective and encouragement throughout what promised to be a difficult and prolonged process. The support network development included preparing key relationships for potential requests for assistance while being transparent about the serious nature of the situation I was facing. This preparation would enable rapid mobilization of resources if circumstances required immediate action while avoiding surprises that might compromise the effectiveness of my support systems when they were most needed. The culmination of my preparation involved creating comprehensive presentation materials that would enable systematic revelation of evidence while maintaining control over the pace and direction of our confrontation. These materials needed to be organized for maximum psychological impact while providing clear documentation that could support immediate decision-making or future legal action depending on their response. The presentation format would begin with a brief summary of my discoveries, followed by systematic presentation of evidence, organized by topic and significance. Each major point would be supported by original documentation that could not be disputed or explained away through alternative interpretation. The materials were designed to build logically from initial concerns to comprehensive evidence of systematic manipulation, creating momentum that would be difficult to interrupt or deflect. Visual aids included charts and graphs that demonstrated the financial impact of their deception in terms that could be quickly understood without extensive explanation. These materials would show how my contributions had been diverted to their benefit while leaving me financially vulnerable and legally unprotected. The visual presentation would make abstract financial concepts concrete while reinforcing the magnitude of the manipulation that had occurred. The confrontation setting would be our dining room, chosen for its symbolic significance as the place where we had celebrated our home purchase and made plans for our shared future. The familiar environment would remind everyone present of the trust that had been violated while providing comfortable seating and adequate space for document presentation. I arranged the furniture to facilitate eye contact and open communication while ensuring that I could control access to evidence materials. The timing of this confrontation was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon when Marcus and Victoria would both be available without work distractions that might provide excuses for delay or abbreviated discussion. The weekend timing would also allow adequate time for processing revelations and beginning meaningful dialogue about resolution options without external pressures that might interfere with decision-making. As I completed these final preparations, I reflected on how the investigation and planning process had transformed my understanding of my own capabilities and determination. The systematic approach I had developed demonstrated analytical skills and strategic thinking that extended far beyond what I had previously believed myself capable of achieving. This experience had proven that I possessed the intelligence and courage necessary to protect my interest, even when facing sophisticated opposition from people who had significantly underestimated my ability. The confrontation that lay ahead would test whether the foundation of evidence I had built was strong enough to achieve fair resolution or whether legal action would be necessary to obtain justice. Either way, I was prepared to pursue whatever course of action was required to reclaim my rightful position and establish the respect that I deserved in any relationship I chose to maintain. The time for accepting manipulation and financial disadvantage had ended, and the time for demanding accountability and fair treatment had finally arrived. The Saturday afternoon that would forever change the dynamics of our family relationships began with deceptive normalcy. Victoria arrived promptly at 2 o'clock, carrying her customary homemade coffee cake and wearing the confident smile of someone who believed she maintained complete control over every aspect of our household's financial and legal arrangements. Marcus greeted his mother with his usual deference, helping her settle into the dining room while expressing appreciation for her continued guidance in managing what he still referred to as his property decision. I observed their familiar interaction patterns while finalizing the organization of documents that would systematically dismantle every assumption they held about my knowledge, capabilities, and willingness to accept continued manipulation. The evidence folders were arranged in precise sequence on the dining room sideboard, positioned to be easily accessible while remaining invisible to casual observation. Each folder contained documentation that would address specific aspects of their deception, building from initial concerns to comprehensive proof of systematic financial fraud. The conversation began with Victoria's routine inquiries about household maintenance and neighborhood developments, topics that provided natural opportunities for her to assert opinions about property management decisions that she expected Marcus to implement without consultation. Her suggestions carried the same authoritative tone that had enabled years of successful manipulation,
reinforced by Marcus's consistent pattern of deferring to her supposed expertise in financial and legal matters. "Marcus, you need to consider refinancing before interest rates increase further," Victoria announced, her statement delivered as instruction rather than suggestion. "I've been researching current market conditions, and the timing is optimal for reducing your monthly payments while accessing additional equity for property improvement." Her recommendation contained multiple assumptions that revealed the extent to which she considered herself the primary decision-maker regarding our property and financial planning. The use of possessive language that excluded me from ownership recognition was consistent with 18 months of similar statements. More significantly, her suggestion that Marcus should access additional home equity indicated ongoing plans to extract value from property that my contributions had helped purchase and maintain. Marcus responded with his characteristic enthusiasm for his mother's financial guidance, immediately requesting details about refinancing options and improvement projects that she considered priority. His eager acceptance of her recommendations demonstrated how completely he had abdicated personal responsibility for understanding the legal and financial implications of decisions made in his name. This dynamic would need to be disrupted before meaningful discussion of fair resolution could occur. I allowed their conversation to continue for several minutes, documenting their assumptions and expectations while preparing to introduce evidence that would fundamentally alter their understanding of our situation. The preliminary discussion served as baseline documentation of their attitudes and intentions, information that would be valuable for demonstrating their lack of awareness regarding the legal vulnerabilities their deception had created. Before we discuss any refinancing decisions, I interject, my voice carrying a level of authority that immediately commanded attention from both Marcus and Victoria. "I believe we need to address some fundamental questions about our property ownership and financial arrangements that require immediate clarification." The shift in conversational dynamics was immediate and palpable. Victoria's confident demeanor flickered with uncertainty as she registered the seriousness of my tone and the formal language that suggested preparation rather than spontaneous concern. Marcus looked confused but attentive, his expression indicating genuine surprise at my unexpected introduction of topics that he had assumed were settled and non-controversial. I retrieved the first evidence folder from the sideboard with deliberate calm, allowing the significance of my preparation to register before beginning systematic presentation of information that would expose the carefully constructed deception that had shaped our property ownership arrangement. The initial documents addressed insurance misrepresentations, chosen as the least threatening entry point that would establish my credibility while building momentum for more damaging revelation. "I received an interesting call from our homeowner's insurance company last month," I began, opening the folder to reveal copies of policy documents and recorded conversations with insurance representatives. They needed to verify information about the property ownership and marital status details that were provided when the policy was established. The insurance documentation revealed discrepancies that were immediately visible to anyone who examined the application materials compared to our actual circumstances. Marcus had been listed as single despite our marriage occurring 8 months before the policy effective. Victoria had been designated as an additional insured party with rights to claim proceeds despite having no apparent legal interest in the property. The combination of these misrepresentations created potential grounds for insurance fraud charges under Connecticut state law. Marcus examined the documents with growing confusion, his expression indicating genuine surprise at discovering information that contradicted his understanding of how the insurance application had been completed. His reaction suggested that he had not been directly involved in providing false information but had delegated responsibility for insurance arrangements to Victoria without understanding the implications of her decision. Victoria's response was markedly different, characterized by immediate attempts to minimize the significance of the discrepancies while providing explanations that revealed sophisticated understanding of insurance regulations and potential legal consequences. Her familiarity with technical details that Marcus clearly did not understand confirmed that she had been the primary architect of arrangements that had systematically excluded me from legal protections while exposing our household to financial liability. These are minor administrative details that can be corrected with simple phone calls, Victoria stated, her tone designed to dismiss concerns while maintaining her position as the expert advisor whose guidance should be trusted without question. Insurance companies often make documentation errors that have no practical significance for coverage or claims processing. Her explanation contained enough technical accuracy to sound plausible while fundamentally misrepresenting the legal implications of providing false information during insurance application. The misrepresentations were not administrative errors made by the insurance company but deliberate choices made during the application process. More importantly, the false marital status information could be used to deny coverage for claims that arose while I was living in the house, creating financial exposure that could result in substantial personal liability. I presented additional documentation that demonstrated Victoria's direct involvement in providing false information while obtaining insurance benefits that she was not entitled to receive. Email correspondence between Victoria and the insurance agent revealed detailed discussions about application strategies that would optimize coverage while minimizing premium costs. These communications showed that the misrepresentations were intentional and calculated rather than inadvertent mistakes that could be dismissed as insignificant oversight. The evidence also included analysis from independent insurance professionals who had reviewed our policy documentation and confirmed that the misrepresentations constituted insurance fraud under Connecticut criminal law. Their written opinions established that the violations were material to coverage decisions and could result in policy cancellation, claim denials, and criminal prosecution, regardless of whether actual claims had been filed based on the false information. The second phase of evidence presentation addressed the core deception that had enabled Victoria's systematic financial manipulation. I retrieved the property deed documentation that would expose her original ownership and profit from selling the house to Marcus at inflated prices using funds that I had contributed without receiving corresponding legal interests in the property we had supposedly purchased together. I think we also need to discuss the complete history of our property ownership, I announced. Placing the certified deed copies on the dining room table where both Marcus and Victoria could examine the official documentation that revealed Victoria's role as the original property owner rather than an independent advisor who had helped us navigate real estate transactions. The original deed showed Victoria Hendricks as the purchaser of 247 Elm Street for $165,000, with the transaction occurring 18 months before Marcus and I had begun house hunting in earnest. The subsequent deed, transferring ownership from Victoria to Marcus, revealed the sale price of $235,000, documenting her $70,000 profit from the family transaction that had been presented to me as arm's-length property purchase. Marcus stared at the documents with complete bewilderment, his confusion indicating genuine ignorance about his mother's original property investment and the financial arrangement that had enabled our house purchase. His reaction suggested that Victoria had concealed important information from him as well, raising questions about whether he had been a willing participant in deliberate deception or an unknowing beneficiary of his mother's sophisticated manipulation.
"I don't understand," Marcus said, his voice carrying the confusion of someone discovering that fundamental assumptions about his life were incorrect. "Mother, you never mentioned that you owned this house before we bought it. You told us you were helping us find good property in the right neighborhood." Victoria's response revealed the calculating intelligence that had enabled her manipulation to succeed for so long while providing additional evidence of intentional deception, rather than innocent assistance. Her explanation attempted to frame her property speculation as beneficial family planning that had ensured Marcus access to quality housing at favorable prices. "I saw an excellent investment opportunity in this neighborhood," Victoria explained, her tone suggesting that her property manipulation represented prudent financial planning rather than deliberate exploitation of her son's trust and my financial contribution. "When you and Rebecca began discussing homeownership, I realized that this property would be perfect for your needs, while providing me with reasonable return on my investment." Her justification contained multiple deceptions that became apparent when examined against the factual evidence I had gathered. The property had not been an opportunistic investment, but a calculated strategy that had aligned with our savings timeline and housing search criteria. The sale price had exceeded fair market value, while the private financing arrangements had created ongoing control mechanisms that served Victoria's interests rather than providing neutral family assistance. I presented additional documentation showing that Victoria's renovation work had cost approximately $32,000, while she had charged Marcus $45,000 in increased sale price, creating unjustified profit that exceeded the value of improvements she had actually completed. Independent contractor estimates confirmed that the renovation pricing had been artificially inflated to maximize Victoria's profit from the family transaction. The evidence also revealed that Victoria had obtained financing for her original property purchase by representing it as a primary residence rather than an investment property, potentially violating the terms of her mortgage agreement. This misrepresentation had enabled her to secure better interest rates while concealing her intention to profit from rapid resale to Marcus using financing that was intended for genuine homeowner occupancy. The third phase of evidence presentation addressed the comprehensive financial impact of Victoria's manipulation on my personal economic position and long-term financial security. The analysis demonstrated how my contributions had been systematically diverted to enrich Victoria and Marcus while leaving me legally vulnerable and financially disadvantaged despite equal participation in property acquisition and maintenance costs. The detailed financial calculations showed that my total investment in the property exceeded $54,000, including direct contributions to down payment savings, mortgage payments, property taxes, insurance premiums, and maintenance expenses. These investments had helped create equity that Marcus controlled entirely while providing no legal protection for my interests despite equal financial participation in property ownership. My research indicates that I have contributed exactly $54,300 to this property through various direct payments and shared expenses, I announced, presenting comprehensive documentation that itemized each category of financial contribution with supporting bank records and payment receipts. This investment has helped create property equity that currently exceeds $78,000, none of which I can legally access despite my substantial financial participation. The opportunity cost analysis revealed additional economic impact that extended beyond direct financial losses. The funds I had committed to property ownership could have been invested in alternative vehicles that would have provided direct benefits to my financial position rather than enriching others, while leaving me economically vulnerable. Conservative investment projections suggested that my opportunity costs exceeded $15,000 during the period since our property purchase. Marcus examined the financial documentation with growing alarm as he began to understand the magnitude of economic disadvantage that Victoria's manipulation had created for my interest. His reaction indicated genuine concern about the fairness of arrangements that had systematically excluded me from legal protections while benefiting from my financial contribution. Victoria's response was more sophisticated, involving attempts to challenge my calculations while minimizing the significance of financial disparities that had resulted from arrangements she had recommended and orchestrated. Her objections focused on technical details of expense allocation and property valuation that demonstrated her awareness of the financial manipulation while revealing her determination to maintain advantages that her deception had created. Rebecca's calculations include expenses that would have been necessary regardless of property ownership structure. Victoria argued, her analysis attempting to diminish the apparent magnitude of financial manipulation while avoiding acknowledgement of systematic deception. Housing costs are inevitable, and her contributions should be viewed as normal household expenses, rather than property investments deserving special recognition. Her argument fundamentally mischaracterized the nature of my financial contributions, while ignoring the legal principles that governed property rights during marriage. My payments had not been voluntary household contributions, but mandatory expenses for maintaining property that my earnings had helped purchase. More importantly, her reasoning assumed that I should bear equal financial responsibility while receiving no corresponding legal protection, a standard that violated basic principles of fairness and marital property law. I presented additional evidence showing that the private loan arrangement between Victoria and Marcus had been structured to ensure that my household contributions would be used to repay Victoria for money she had provided to purchase property from herself at inflated prices. This circular financial arrangement had enabled Victoria to profit twice from the same transaction while using my income to finance her gain. The home equity line of credit that Marcus had established carried Victoria's signature as co-borrower, giving her access to funds secured by property that my contributions had helped purchase. Bank records showed that Victoria had withdrawn money from this credit line for personal expenses unrelated to our household needs, essentially borrowing against equity that my investments had helped create. The fourth phase of evidence presentation addressed the legal vulnerabilities that Victoria and Marcus had created through their systematic misrepresentation and potential criminal liability that could result from continued non-cooperation with fair resolution efforts. This section was designed to demonstrate that the consequences of their deception extended far beyond family relationship disputes to include potential prosecution for insurance fraud, mortgage fraud, and other criminal violations. Attorney consultations had confirmed that the insurance misrepresentations constituted criminal fraud under Connecticut state law regardless of whether claims had been filed based on false information. The deliberate provision of incorrect marital status information during applications could result in felony charges carrying potential prison sentences and substantial financial penalties that would far exceed any benefits obtained through the deception. I have consulted with legal counsel regarding the implications of these financial arrangements. I am presenting written legal opinions that confirmed my rights to restitution while outlining potential criminal charges that could be filed against both Victoria and Marcus if they refused to cooperate with fair resolution effort. The evidence suggests multiple violations of state and federal law that could result in serious criminal consequences. The mortgage fraud implications were particularly serious because Victoria's misrepresentations during her original property purchase had enabled her to obtain financing that was intended for legitimate homeowner occupancy rather than investment speculation. Federal regulations governing mortgage applications carried criminal penalties that included substantial prison sentences for individuals who provided false information to obtain real estate finance. Marcus appeared genuinely shocked to learn that his participation in his mother's arrangements had potentially exposed him to criminal liability despite his lack of knowledge about the underlying deception. His reaction suggested that he had trusted Victoria's expertise without understanding that her advice was designed to benefit her interests rather than providing neutral financial guidance. Victoria's response revealed sophisticated understanding of legal risks, while demonstrating her determination to avoid acknowledging wrongdoing that could strengthen my position in potential litigation. Her objections focused on challenging the applicability of criminal statutes, while minimizing the significance of technical violations that she characterized as common business practices. These are complex technical issues that are subject to various legal interpretations. Victoria stated, her response indicating awareness of legal vulnerabilities, while attempting to discourage pursuit of criminal referrals that could result in prosecution regardless of civil resolution outcome. Many real estate transactions involve similar arrangements that are considered normal family assistance rather than criminal activity. Her characterization was fundamentally misleading because family assistance did not typically involve systematic misrepresentation to financial institutions, insurance companies, and government agencies for the purpose of obtaining benefits through false information. The pattern of deception documented in my evidence extended far beyond normal family financial planning to include deliberate fraud that had enabled unjust enrichment at my expense. I presented additional documentation showing that Victoria's private loan arrangements with Marcus violated federal regulations governing inter-family transactions that were designed to prevent tax avoidance through artificial pricing schemes. The Internal Revenue Service had specific requirements for documenting legitimate family loans that included market rate interest charges and formal repayment terms that were absent from Victoria's arrangement. The tax implications included potential penalties for both Victoria and Marcus if the Internal Revenue Service determined that their private loan constituted a disguised gift that should have been reported for tax purposes. The failure to properly document and report interfamily financial transactions could result in additional tax liability, penalties, and interest charges that would compound the financial consequences of their deception. The final phase of initial evidence presentation established my strategic position for negotiating fair resolution while demonstrating that continued resistance would result in escalating legal action that would expose both Victoria and Marcus to significant financial and criminal consequences. The presentation was designed to encourage cooperation while maintaining credible threats that would discourage attempts at further manipulation or asset concealment. The resolution framework included three primary components: addressing past financial losses, current legal corrections, and future protection mechanisms that would prevent additional manipulation while providing fair compensation for documented economic damage. Each component was structured to provide measurable benefits while remaining reasonable enough to encourage voluntary agreement rather than forcing expensive litigation. I am prepared to discuss fair resolution of these issues, I announced, presenting comprehensive settlement proposals that addressed all aspects of the financial manipulation while providing Victoria and Marcus with opportunities to correct their wrongdoing without admitting criminal liability. However, any acceptable resolution must include full restitution of my financial contributions, plus appropriate compensation for the legal and economic risks that your arrangements have created. The restitution calculations included immediate repayment of my documented $54,000 investment, plus reasonable compensation for opportunity costs that would bring the total financial recovery to approximately $68,000. This amount represented the minimum necessary to restore my financial position while providing modest additional compensation for the economic uncertainty and legal exposure that their deception had created. Property ownership corrections would require adding my name to the deed in proportion to my documented financial contributions, while modifying mortgage and insurance documentation to reflect joint ownership that provided equal legal protections for both spouses. These changes would establish the legal foundation that should have existed from the beginning while preventing future manipulation of property decisions that affected my interest. The private loan arrangement between Victoria and Marcus would need to be completely restructured to eliminate provisions that gave Victoria control over our property decisions while establishing market rate interest charges that reflected the true cost of family finance. Alternatively, the loan could be immediately paid off using funds that Victoria and Marcus would provide as part of comprehensive settlement that addressed all aspects of their financial manipulation. As I concluded this initial presentation of evidence and settlement framework, I observed the profound impact that systematic documentation had achieved in disrupting the power dynamics that had enabled Victoria's manipulation to succeed for so long. The strength of my evidence had established my credibility while demonstrating that continued resistance would result in escalating consequences that would far exceed the costs of fair resolution. The foundation for meaningful negotiation had been established, and the choice between cooperation and confrontation now rested with Victoria and Marcus. The silence that followed my comprehensive evidence presentation lasted exactly 47 seconds, a period during which I watched Victoria's expression transform from confident authority to calculating assessment as she absorbed the implications of my documentation and began formulating defensive strategy. Her recovery was swift and sophisticated, demonstrating the kind of tactical intelligence that had enabled years of successful manipulation while revealing her determination to maintain control despite the overwhelming evidence of systematic deception. Victoria's initial response focused on challenging my credibility rather than addressing the factual evidence I had presented. A classic deflection technique designed to shift attention away from documented wrongdoing toward questions about my motivations and qualifications for conducting financial analysis. Her approach revealed sophisticated understanding of psychological manipulation while confirming that she had no intention of acknowledging responsibility for the systematic exploitation that my investigation had exposed. Rebecca, I can see that you have been very busy conducting what you believe to be research, Victoria began, her tone carrying the patronizing authority of someone addressing a confused child who had misunderstood obvious facts. However, financial and legal matters are extremely complex, and your interpretations demonstrate fundamental misunderstandings about normal real estate practices and family financial planning. Her response contained multiple layers of manipulation designed to undermine my position while avoiding direct engagement with the specific evidence I had presented. The suggestion that my analysis contained fundamental misunderstandings was intended to restore her position as the financial expert, whose judgment should be trusted over my documented findings. The characterization of systematic systematic fraud as normal business practices was designed to minimize the significance of her deception while making my concerns appear unreasonable and uninformed. Marcus appeared genuinely torn between his habitual deference to his mother's expertise and his growing awareness that the evidence I had presented revealed serious problems with financial arrangements that he had not fully understood. His confusion created an opportunity for building alliance around shared interests in resolving the situation fairly, but it also made him vulnerable to Victoria's sophisticated manipulation tactics that had proven effective throughout his adult life. "Mother, some of these documents show things that you never explained to me," Marcus said, his voice carrying uncertainty rather than accusation as he attempted to navigate between conflicting loyalties without taking positions that might anger either his wife or his mother. "Why didn't you tell me that you owned the house before we bought it? That seems like important information that we should have discussed." Victoria's response to Marcus revealed the emotional manipulation techniques that had maintained her control over his decision-making throughout their relationship. Her approach combined expressions of hurt feelings with assertions of protective intentions, creating psychological pressure that discouraged further questioning while reinforcing her position as the misunderstood benefactor whose sacrifices were being ungratefully criticized. "Marcus, everything I have done has been to protect your interests and ensure your financial security," Victoria replied, her voice carrying wounded disappointment that suggested betrayal by ungrateful family members who failed to appreciate her selfless guidance. "I purchased that property as an investment that would benefit you directly when you were ready for homeownership. The timing worked perfectly to provide you with excellent housing at favorable terms." Her explanation contained enough emotional appeal to resonate with Marcus's psychological dependencies while fundamentally misrepresenting the financial realities that my evidence had documented. The characterization of her property speculation as protective investment ignored the inflated pricing that had enriched her at our expense while creating legal vulnerabilities that threatened our financial security rather than enhancing. I recognized that Victoria's defensive strategy was designed to separate Marcus from alliance with my position by reinforcing his emotional dependency on her approval while characterizing my legitimate concerns as attacks on family unity. Her approach would likely prove effective unless I could demonstrate that her manipulation threatened Marcus's interests as well as mine, creating shared motivation for demanding accountability and fair resolution. Victoria's defensive strategy evolved rapidly as she realized that emotional appeals alone would not be sufficient to discredit the comprehensive evidence I had presented. Her approach shifted toward more aggressive tactics designed to create pressure for abandoning my demands while threatening consequences that would be costly for everyone involved if I continued pursuing accountability for her systematic deception. The escalation began with attempts to characterize my investigation as betrayal of family trust that demonstrated fundamental character flaws rather than legitimate protection of my financial interests. Victoria's approach was designed to make continued pursuit of fair resolution appear morally questionable while positioning herself as the victim of unreasonable attacks by an ungrateful daughter-in-law who refused to appreciate generous family assistance. "I am deeply hurt and disappointed that you would conduct secret investigations into family financial matters instead of simply asking questions if you had concerns," Victoria announced, her tone combining personal injury with moral authority designed to shame me for protecting my legitimate interests through proper research and documentation. "This kind of suspicious behavior suggests serious problems with trust and communication that threaten the foundation of your marriage." Her characterization of thorough investigation as suspicious behavior was particularly manipulative because it attempted to transform my strengths into weaknesses while avoiding acknowledgement of the deception that had made investigation necessary. The suggestion that my research indicated character problems was designed to deflect attention from her systematic fraud while creating doubt about my credibility and motivation. The attack on my marriage was calculated to create additional pressure by threatening relationship consequences that might discourage continued pursuit of financial accountability. Victoria understood that most people would prioritize relationship preservation over financial recovery, making threats to marital stability an effective tool for maintaining her advantageous position despite documented wrongdoing.
Marcus's response to his mother's emotional manipulation revealed the effectiveness of psychological control techniques that had shaped his decision-making throughout their relationship. His immediate concern focused on preserving family harmony rather than addressing the substantive issues that my evidence had raised, demonstrating how Victoria's influence operated through emotional dependency rather than rational analysis. Maybe we should all take some time to calm down and think about this situation more carefully, Marcus suggested, his proposal reflecting Victoria's successful redirection of focus away from financial accountability toward relationship management concerns. These kinds of family discussions can get emotional, and we might make better decisions if we approach everything with clearer head. His suggestion for delayed consideration played directly into Victoria's interests by providing time for additional manipulation while reducing the psychological pressure that immediate confrontation had created. The characterization of systematic fraud as an emotional family discussion was designed to minimize the seriousness of the legal and financial issues while creating space for Victoria to develop more sophisticated countermeasures. I recognized that accepting delay would allow Victoria to implement asset protection strategies while continuing her psychological manipulation of Marcus in private settings where I would have no opportunity to present counter-evidence or maintain momentum toward fair resolution. The strategic necessity of maintaining pressure became clear as Victoria's tactics revealed her determination to preserve her advantages through any means necessary. Victoria's resistance strategy extended beyond emotional manipulation to include practical measures designed to protect her financial interests from potential legal action while maintaining her control over property and assets that could be used to satisfy restitution claims. Her approach demonstrated sophisticated understanding of asset protection techniques while confirming that she viewed our confrontation as preliminary to serious legal warfare rather than an opportunity for good faith resolution. The first indication of asset concealment activities came through Marcus's casual mention of his mother's sudden interest in reviewing and updating her financial planning documents. Victoria had scheduled appointments with attorneys and financial advisors during the week following our confrontation, ostensibly to ensure that her estate planning reflected current circumstances and family relationships. Mother mentioned that she wants to review her will and some investment accounts, Marcus informed me during one of our increasingly tense private conversations about the ongoing family crisis. She said the discussion about property ownership made her realize that she should update her documentation to reflect current family situations more accurately. His explanation revealed either genuine naivety about his mother's motivations or willful blindness to the obvious implications of sudden financial planning activity following exposure of systematic fraud. Victoria's urgent need to update legal documents suggested preparation for potential litigation rather than routine estate planning maintenance. The timing of these activities confirmed that she understood the seriousness of her legal exposure while indicating her determination to minimize potential consequences through strategic asset management. My investigation into Victoria's recent financial activities revealed additional concerning developments that suggested coordinated efforts to reduce her apparent wealth while maintaining effective control over resources that could be used to satisfy legal judgment. Bank records showed unusual transfer patterns that moved funds between accounts in ways that created complex ownership structures while reducing the apparent value of easily identifiable assets. Victoria had also initiated conversations with Marcus about modifying their private loan arrangement, ostensibly to formalize documentation that would protect both parties in the event of unforeseen circumstances. Her proposed modifications included provisions that would accelerate repayment schedules while giving her additional security interests in our property that would strengthen her position in potential legal proceedings. Mother thinks we should update our loan agreement to include proper legal documentation, Marcus explained, his acceptance of Victoria's suggestions indicating continued vulnerability to her manipulation despite growing awareness of problems with their financial arrangement. She says that formal documentation would protect both of us and ensure that everything is handled properly according to legal requirements. requirement. The proposed loan modifications were clearly designed to strengthen Victoria's legal position while creating additional pressure for settlement on terms favorable to her interest. Formal documentation of her security interest in our property would make legal challenge more difficult, while accelerated repayment terms would create financial pressure that might force acceptance of unfavorable resolution terms. I realized that immediate legal action would be necessary to prevent Victoria from implementing asset protection strategies that would make recovery of my financial losses significantly more difficult and expensive. Attorney Chen had prepared emergency court filings that could freeze assets and prevent transfers pending resolution of fraud claims, but these protective measures would need to be activated before Victoria could complete her defensive preparation. Victoria's resistance strategy included sophisticated psychological warfare designed to isolate me from emotional support while creating pressure for abandoning my demands through social and family relationship consequences that would extend far beyond the immediate financial dispute. Her approach demonstrated understanding that most people would choose relationship preservation over financial recovery if forced to choose between conflicting priorities. The psychological campaign began with systematic outreach to extended family members and mutual friends, designed to present Victoria's version of our conflict while characterizing my evidence presentation as unreasonable attack on generous family assistance. Her narrative positioned herself as the misunderstood benefactor whose selfless efforts to help young family members had been repaid with suspicion and legal threats that threatened family unity. Marcus's sister Jennifer became Victoria's first ally in this campaign, accepting her mother's characterization of our dispute as evidence of my problematic attitudes toward family relationships rather than legitimate response to documented financial manipulation. Jennifer's support provided Victoria with credible family validation while creating additional pressure on Marcus to choose between supporting his wife's financial claims or maintaining harmony with his extended family. Jennifer called me yesterday to express concern about the tension this is creating for everyone. Marcus informed me, his report revealing Victoria's success in mobilizing family pressure against my position. She thinks that family financial matters should be handled privately rather than through formal legal processes that could damage relationships permanently. Jennifer's intervention reflected Victoria's successful reframing of systematic fraud as family financial disagreement that should be resolved through compromise and forgiveness rather than accountability and restitution. The characterization of legal protection as relationship damage was designed to create guilt about pursuing legitimate remedies while positioning Victoria as the reasonable party seeking amicable resolution. Victoria's psychological strategy also included subtle threats about potential consequences for my professional reputation if our family dispute became public knowledge.
Her approach suggested that employers and colleagues might question my judgment and stability if they learned about legal actions against family members, creating career-related pressure that supplemented relationship-based manipulation. People in professional environments can be very judgmental about family legal disputes. Victoria mentioned during one of our strained conversations, her comment, designed to create anxiety about potential career consequences, while avoiding direct threats that might strengthen my legal position. Sometimes these kinds of situations can affect workplace relationships and advancement opportunities in ways that take years to overcome. Her veiled threats revealed sophisticated understanding of professional vulnerability, while demonstrating willingness to use any available leverage to maintain her advantageous position. The suggestion that pursuing legal remedies would create career damage was designed to make the costs of accountability appear to exceed the benefits of financial recovery, encouraging acceptance of continued exploitation rather than risking professional consequences. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.